Max, I'm an alcoholic.
Hey, Max.
Oh, I'm kind of oversharing after the last few weeks, but I'm really grateful to be here. I shared my 1 year here, and it's really special because, if it weren't for this fellowship, I wouldn't be in this chair. I guess I'll just start from the beginning. Let me just share that I feel like my heart's about to jump out of my throat. I think I came from a very well-to-do family. I got everything that I needed and wanted. My family loved me. I had my mom, my dad, my 2 half-brothers. And my childhood was just filled of doozies and soccer and fairy gardens and, anything that a child could want. It was all very fun. I guess, my first experience kind of using a substance to make me feel better and to fill the void was when I was about 6 or 7 years old. I was sick with flu, and my mom had left some cough syrup next to my bed. And I remember drinking the whole, she gave me a bit and it made me feel better. And then when she left, I drank the whole bottle and I hid it under my bed. And then she bought another one and I did the same and I hid it under my bed. And, obviously it took the symptoms of flu away, but it also, it filled that void that I never knew what to fill that with. I was just so fearful. I was comparing myself to so many kids in school, and that was pretty much my whole life during school. I was always comparing myself to how girls looked, to how they acted, to how they were happy, to how they got boys' attention, and I wanted that, and I would act like them. But my fear came out in a young age as well, and I was also about 7, and I remember crying on my dad's chest, worrying about how I was going to make ends meet when I was growing up, who was going to pay for my medical aid, where was I going to work, and I was 7 years old worrying about all of that. Life went on, and I guess my next fix was when I was 11, and that was kind of like the biggest thing for me was when my grandfather passed away. And I had seen some girls, in my grade and older, cutting themselves, and I thought that looked like it worked. And after my grandfather passed away, that's what I started doing. I started cutting myself when I was 11 years old. And it worked for me. It filled that void. It took my emotional pain away, and it fulfilled me for a brief time. At the same time, I was kind of going through my parents' medicine cabinet and popping whatever I could find in there, because it made me feel better. It made me feel confident at school. It made me also just feel like I didn't really care what other people thought about me. During school, I also just kind of wore a mask the whole time, and I can see, I always wanted a reaction out of people, how I looked, how I dressed. I always wanted to look like I was fearless, and I wore this gothic mask to make me look fearless, to make me look angry, to make me look unapproachable, and I liked that. I liked reactions from people. I was a very average student. I didn't really try that hard. The only subject that I really liked was art, and I only tried hard in that. But I really never knew what I wanted to do growing up. I would always change my mind, or I'd always make a commitment to an extramural, like horse riding or dancing or whatever, and I would never stick to it. I was really bad at sticking to plans or, hobbies or whatever. I remember counting through all the extramurals that I did with my parents, and I had done 23 extramurals. I could never commit to anything. And that pretty much is how my whole life up until now has been. I couldn't commit. So when it came to choosing a subject to go to university or go to college, I decided to do hospitality management because I felt like it would take me out of South Africa. I could go travel, and I wouldn't have to be with my parents because, you know, they wronged me in every sense. Meanwhile, I was just really arrogant and entitled. And I was a spoiled brat, really. I always took my parents for granted, and they, you know, they loved me unconditionally. But yeah, so I did hospitality management, and even with that, I couldn't commit. We had to do practicals, and I went into the kitchen, and, you know, I did that because I thought I would hate cooking and that I would hate that kind of like side of the industry. But yeah, I fell in love with chefing very quickly. Firstly, because I was surrounded by men the whole time. It was chaotic, there was a lot of swearing, and it was just like, you know, everybody was super rowdy, and I loved that. I loved that chaos of the kitchen and the rush of it. And then the lifestyle that came with it, which was, you know, drinking and using, being debaucherous, really. Yeah, I missed quite a few parts of my story already. So I'm going to backtrack. When I was 15 or so, and this is where like my fix over men came, I was dating a 27-year-old, and my parents found out, and obviously, you know, now I can understand that they were quite freaked out about that, you know, 15-year-old dating a 27-year-old. And I was doing some music lessons at a music store in Glenwood. And my parents had approached the manager of the music store and said, please can our daughter come and work there, but we'll pay you to like let her work there because we just don't want her around, and, you know, we just want to keep her out of trouble. Shame my poor parents. I still saw that guy at the music store anyway, and the manager was giving me the money, so, you know, I was happy. Eventually, they offered me a job on the weekends there and during the school holidays, and I felt like I had a responsibility, and I think that was the one thing that I committed to for like 3 years. Later on, when I was 17, I was dating a 50-year-old, then I was dating a 32-year-old, and like that was my life. I was always in dishonest relationships, either, you know, behind my parents' backs or behind my friends' backs, or I just wasn't going in as my true self, you know. Also, looking back now, like I can see that fear of, you know, who's gonna help me when I'm older, like that gave me security. I felt secure, like I was gonna be looked after. So moving on back to chefing and whatever. I did pretty well in chef school, and 6 months before I graduated, I was hired at one of Durban's best restaurants, as their sous chef, so one under head chef. And that was my greatest accomplishment, quite honestly. My parents were really proud of me, I was proud of me. I got to kind of control and be bossy in the kitchen, and that's what I liked. But on top of that, like I just became a really angry person. Yeah, I was working 18-hour shifts, no excuse. But, you know, with all of that responsibility, I just became really hostile and aggressive, and I remember going around the kitchen and either throwing chili powder in people's faces or rubbing chili oil on people's lips or keeping metal utensils in the fire and waiting for somebody to come and grab it. Like I was just always out to hurt somebody because I was malicious. And yeah, like now I can look back and I can say like I don't ever want to be that person again. You know, I didn't only like physically hurt people, I was just really rude and hurtful in the kitchen, and yeah. So that was my life for I think about 2 years. You know, I'd work 18-hour shifts, then I would go home or I'd go out to a pub and I'd drink and I'd use, sleep for a bit, and that was my loop throughout my whole life of working in the kitchen. And yeah, I remember the one morning, and this is like, I can remember it like it was yesterday because it's such a big, you know, part of my journey. And yeah, I remember driving down to work. I was living with my boyfriend at the time. We were just up the road from my work. And we drove down to the kitchen, and he dropped me off at work. And I remember seeing the sea, because I was in Umhlanga at the time, and it was just so beautiful. It was flat, and The sun was shining, it was a beautiful day. Not that I really ever saw the day, but that day I remember. And I thought about my dad, who, my parents hardly ever saw me during that time. I didn't really have a relationship with them by then. And I really only just used them for money, quite honestly. I'd go there and steal money, or go there and steal food. But yeah, so I thought about my dad, and he surf skied and he gymed. He was like the healthiest person that I had ever known. And he, I just thought about him that morning. And as I was doing kitchen service, morning service, my boyfriend at the time, he had come into the kitchen, and I just remember that look on his face. And he said, "We have to go home." I was like, "Why? What's happening at home?" And he said, "No, like your parents' home." And like my heart dropped. I knew something bad had happened, and I'd never dealt well with death. With my grandfathers both passing away, I would just cut myself, and eventually, with my disease progressing, I was using and drinking over that stuff, and I'd use that stuff a lot. But I hadn't known yet that my dad had passed away, and I finally got it out of somebody to tell me what was going on. And I guess my family was scared of how I would react, because I never reacted well to any of that stuff. And being the alcoholic that I am, I was able to make that whole day about me. My mom had just watched my father die, and there I was in the kitchen just pouring myself a drink and talking about me and my day at work. And obviously making my father's death all about me, and not worrying about my mom or how she felt, or the fact that she just lost her husband and her best friend. I'd also made quite a scene in my whole neighborhood trying to find my brothers, and everybody was quite distraught over that. My dad was a very well-known soccer player when he was younger. He was, he came from a really poor background, and he gave us everything that we ever wanted, and now he was gone, and I made it about me. So to be selfless, I decided, okay, well, let me move back in with my mom because she needs my help. Well, I really just made that whole experience way worse for her, because I would come home drunk or high, and my mom was distraught. She was watching her child do this. She had lost her husband. She had no support. At the same time, my mom was going through her own grieving process, and she was kind of pushing family away, and I can never understand why she did that, but that's just the way that she had to do things, and it is what it is. Eventually, my mom had enough of me, and at 4 o'clock in the morning, the one day she had kicked me out. Previously to that, sorry, I keep jumping around, but after my dad had died, I ended up in my first psychiatric ward. And I had gone to a psychologist when I was 13 or so, like with regards to cutting and whatever, but I hated that guy. I would stick scissors into my blazer wanting to stab him because I just didn't like him. And also his daughter went to the same school as me, so she was going around telling her friends how I went to a psychologist, and obviously I didn't like that. I didn't want to be seen as weak. Anyway, so I ended up in my first psychiatric ward just before my mom had kicked me out, and I was introduced to more medication, and obviously I loved it. It was like an absolute vacation for me. My friends would come visit me, and I would use in the rehab, and I just thought, it was all fun and games, really. I didn't have any willingness or any wanting to get clean or sober, sorry. And it was just a big joke to me. And my mom, for those 2 months that I was in that psychiatric ward, my mom came to visit me every single day, and every single day she left there crying. And I still couldn't see how much I was hurting her and what I was doing, to her and to her life. I was just adding more stress on top of stress, Eventually, I was halfway through, I was let out on an evening pass, and I went home to my boyfriend, and I found out that he had cheated on me during his band's tour. and I lost my absolute shit. I broke guitars, I broke coffee tables, I started cutting myself in front of him because I couldn't really deal well with any of that stuff. And I put a lot of blame on him as well for how I was dealing with my dad's death. And obviously during that time my using got worse, so he dropped me off back at the psychiatric ward, and that was the last time that I saw of him. So fast forward, I went back home to my mom, and 2 weeks later she had kicked me out and I had nowhere to go. So I went to go stay with somebody that I met in the psychiatric ward. And that was completely unmanageable because she was going through a divorce. So I thought I was being really helpful because she needed support. Eventually I had also moved to my boss's house, and Shane bless him. I honestly was going to go live in the kitchen or live in the storage room, and then he took me in, and he could see, I wasn't doing well, and I didn't really know anything about addiction or alcoholism and that it was a disease or whatever, but he had suggested, like, why don't I go to meetings? So I looked at meetings online and I saw that they were in churches, and I was like, fuck that. God took my dad away, God took my family away from me, my mother doesn't want me, my grandpas are dead, I don't want anything to do with God. I had no idea what this 12-step program was about. And I guess, growing up and stuff, I grew up in a Catholic home, and I didn't really have a good relationship with God. I always thought it was like a very judgmental God. But eventually that loop of working in the kitchen got worse, my using got worse. My behavior got worse. I was the worst employee. I was stealing from the kitchen. I was stealing food. I was drinking. I was using in the kitchen. I had also gotten my head chef to start using with me, and we were dating as well at the time. And I took him as my hostage, and I would always make him feel guilty if he wasn't using with me. I also got my cousin to use, and her life was becoming completely unmanageable because of I just took them as my hostage, and eventually my cousin lost her job, and after that she was like, okay, that's enough, Max, I can't be around you anymore, because I was that toxic, Now I'm happy to say my cousin phones me if she has problems, and I love that I have my relationship with my cousin again, because she's my sister that I never had. As I said, my using was getting worse, and eventually I was so sick and tired of how I was living. I was so tired of this loop. I was so tired of feeling the way I was feeling, because that void, it wasn't being filled anymore. I was just using to survive through the day, and I was always thinking about the next time that I'd use. So I remember my boyfriend and I, we picked up and we went home, and I never knew this would be my last day that I'd use or drink. I never knew that this would happen. I never knew that there would ever, a chance for me to get into recovery. And I didn't know that 12 steps was a solution. So I remember walking in and seeing this scene of, the same scene that I saw every night, and I was tired of it. So I walked to the kitchen, I got one of our chef's knives, and I slit my wrist. And I thought, well, it's fine, I'm just bleeding out here, but it's fine, we'll just wrap it up, and we'll go back to our daily life again, after that. I was so delusional to the fact that all of my tendons were hanging out of my arm. And I didn't want him to take me to the hospital. I didn't want an ambulance. I didn't want my mother. I was just over it, I wanted to die, but also I was so fearful to live as well. I was so tired of my life. So he eventually took me to the hospital, and I remember lying in the ER bed just kind of laughing my head off, because this was all a big fat joke to me, and I didn't really take it seriously at all. He had called my mom, and I remember my mom coming in, and the look on her face, I've never seen my mom so distraught and hurt. And I still didn't see the seriousness in what I was doing to her. So yeah, I stayed in that hospital for a week, and during that time I saw a psychiatrist, and she has suggested, why don't you go to a rehab for 28 days, sort yourself out. And I was like, sweet, 28 days, that's fine, it's better than 2 months at the other psychiatric ward. So I'll do this, my mom will cool off, she'll take me back home, I can go back to work, and everything will be fine. Anyway, so my mom came back the next day and she said, no, you're going to another rehab for 3 months. And I lost my shit. I did. I went mad. I was so not okay with the fact that she was taking 3 months of my life away. And I was like, no, I'll stop using by myself. But yeah, anyway, so the next day I found myself driving up the South Coast, and I remember saying to my mom, if they mention anything about God, I don't want anything to do with it. I'll leave, I'll run away, I don't want anything to do with it. And when I arrived in treatment, I had no hair. I had 9 piercings in my face. I was all black and Doc Martens, and I was just a walking defect, really. I was just so angry with everything, with life, and how everybody treated me, and I was such a victim. But the last thing that my mom said to me when she dropped me off was, you're the last piece that I have of him. And that's always stuck with me, because she was referring to my dad. I was the last piece of him for her. And after my life story, I kind of honored that. I want to live and honor my dad. That's what I want to do in my recovery. But yeah, listen, I was definitely not willing to get better. In fact, for the first 3 months, I kind of messed around. I didn't take any of it really seriously. I didn't speak to my counselor very often. She eventually put me on a sharing ban, I had to share, a sharing consequence, and I couldn't speak to my boyfriend anymore because he was using. And yeah, I thought, my life was ending. But then I got into a dishonest relationship, which is the story of my life. And that's kind of motivated me to stay there for my 4th month. Obviously with all the wrong motives as usual. And I got into quite a bit of trouble along with that. And, for a while it made me feel better, filled that void. I wasn't worried about the 12 steps. I was more worried about this guy, and he was fixing me and he wanted to help me, and that's all I needed. But yeah, then a concern group was called, and this big tattooed guy was kind of like, you messing around with this Lati, and I was like, oh my god, he called me a Lati, it's the end of my world. And then another group was thrown, and there was a voting, who was going to be voted out the house. One person put their hand up for me, and I resented that person for quite a long time. But on top of that, I got literally all the consequences out of the sun. I couldn't shave my hair, I couldn't color my hair, I couldn't wear makeup, I had to take out all my piercings, couldn't speak to men, I couldn't speak to my mom, I had a luxury ban, my mom couldn't visit me, I had all of them. And I honestly thought my world was ending. They had stripped me of my identity and all that I associated myself with, and it was just the end of the world. I remember I ran up to my room and I dyed my eyebrows before they could take away my makeup, because I'm a ginger, I don't have any eyebrows, so I'm going to live like this. It's my eyebrows had to be fine. And then I took out all my piercings and I felt absolutely naked. I had never seen myself look so naked in my life, and I felt like this fearful little girl again. From when I was 7 years old, and I hated it. I hated the way people looked at me. I walked around for a month with my head down because I was so ashamed of how I looked, I was not comfortable in my skin at all. And I remember my counselor saying after a few weeks or so, she had said to me, she's never seen me so happy. And that was kind of a light bulb moment for me where, I didn't have to wear this mask to to look a certain way, like I can just be myself around people, and people like me for who I am, you know, if I just be my true self. And that's kind of when I started like really getting involved in the house and like doing what I needed to do, helping the newcomer. And like I remember fetching somebody, and it was like the most exciting thing for me, you know, it gave me such a rush to be of service, and I loved it. I loved to be a part of that, and to be part of the kitchen in the treatment center, and to be part of the animals, and yeah, I loved it. I loved to be a part of. So I stayed there for about 7 months, and I had committed to a year. I was so fearful of leaving. I also had plans of moving back home to my mom, but things were kind of, you know, a bit rocky there. We didn't really have a strong relationship. Our relationship was mostly built on like resentment, and yeah, it was very codependent. During that time, I had also been given the opportunity to work whilst I was there, and I was working at a restaurant here in Rocky Bay. And that was a really interesting experience, you know. I thought I would just kind of like morph back into chefing industry and I'll be fun, I'll use my program, and you know, everything was going to be hunky-dory. Well, it was definitely not. I just became the same Chef Max, the same angry, controlling person. And you know, I was surrounded by drugs and alcohol whilst I was there. The head chef or ex-head chef was using, and I didn't like how I felt. You know, I felt really anxious. I felt scared, and I was mostly scared of, like, you know, if I don't do chefing, what am I going to do with my life? But yeah, eventually I had to leave there. It was not a good place for me, and I just kind of like surrendered to the fact that like I can't go back to that industry in my recovery at the moment. It's not really for me. So I went back to treatment, and I wasn't working, and then eventually I got discharged, and I had this plan of spending 4 wonderful days with my mom, which I was really excited about. You know, I hadn't spent so many days with my mom before. I went home maybe like 2 weekends, but each weekend, you know, it was very awkward around my mom. I always felt like I had to kind of like tiptoe around her. But yeah, eventually, you know, she started asking me questions about the program and amends and all of that, and like I openly explained it to her, and she was not happy with it. She was not okay with the fact that I wanted to speak to the rest of my family because she held such strong resentments. And I think that was like one of the first times when somebody like stood up for my recovery, and I also had to put my recovery first. I had phoned the treatment center and phoned my counselor, and I went back to treatment for 4 more days. And yeah, that was a really heartbreaking time for me, the fact that, you know, my mom wasn't okay with Sober Max. You know, she wasn't okay with Max in active alcoholism or Sober Max, and yeah, it was really heartbreaking, but it's one of the best things that has happened in my recovery, and I'm grateful for that now. I was also really jealous that like most of the guys got to go to halfway house, and there was no halfway house for girls yet, but I'm grateful that, you know, that wasn't my experience, because yeah, I needed to go move into my flat by myself, because there I learned a whole lot of independence. I was working 3 days a week for 450 Rand a week. My mum was still helping me out at the time, but yeah, I was not happy at that job. It was definitely not for me, you know. So yeah, I put in the action. For 5 months I looked for a job in Skopra, and it was really, really hard, and I had to deal with rejection and like people calling me back or whatever. But you know, God worked in my life. When I hand things over to God, God works in my life. And amazingly, like when my dad was about to die, he was writing in his will, and he scribbled my now boss's name in there for my family's financial advisor. And somehow I end up in Dududu, and then I end up in Skopra looking for a job, and this guy that I meet, who's my family's financial advisor, offers me a job. after a few months, and I was so grateful, you know, like God was really working in my life, and there was that golden thread, you know, that we hear about. And yeah, I'm so incredibly grateful to have that responsibility that my boss has given me. You know, I have keys to an office. I open up the office. I help my boss with whatever he needs. I have the opportunity to study. Sometimes I'm not really good at studying, but I've been given all of these gifts and responsibilities through that, as well as financial independency. You know, I don't have to depend on my mom anymore. I pay for my medical aid, my car insurance, my rent, for all of the things that I need and want for. And sometimes it's really hard to learn how to budget for yourself, and I'm not always that good at it. But, you know, one thing that I've learned from being in this fellowship is that I'm always looked after, I'm always loved, I'm always fed, and I have a family here. So, yeah, in my first year, it was more like connecting with my family, rebuilding my relationships with my gran and my cousins and all of that. And it was amazing how they just, you know, they opened their arms up to me, and they loved me, and they accepted me for who I was. One of the coolest things that happened when, on the day that my dad died, I remember my aunt, my dad's sister, she was swearing and shouting at me because of, you know, obviously my behavior. And when I had went to go visit her in my first year, she actually made amends to me, and that gave me an opportunity to make amends to her. And that was a beautiful experience to have with her, and we're super close now, and I'm really grateful to, you know, just be close with my family again. As well as, you know, recently my brother and I have reconnected, my one brother and I, and, you know, he just went through a breakup, and he like spoke to me about it. And that's such a gift, you know, to be a part of, wanting some, you know, your family members want to, you know, ask you for help, and I love that. I love to be there to support them. Yeah, and then after my first year, well, like during like my 11th, 12th month, I was an absolute mess. I was so scared of like this new life that I was living, and you know, it was quite overwhelming. You know, my whole life I've been using and drinking. Now all of a sudden for a year I was clean and sober, and it was, you know, it was quite overwhelming at first. But at that time my relationship with my mom had gotten a lot worse, and eventually she just didn't want to talk to me anymore, and that's been like a really long journey, and it's still like a big journey for me to kind of accept that, you know, that my mom doesn't want to be a part of my life anymore. And it's hurtful, but like I said, I'm grateful for it on the best of days. Other days I can't accept it. It's really hurtful some days, but I have so many parents within this fellowship. I have so many parents in my family, you know. I'm just constantly loved. One of the lessons that I also learned in treatment when I was in a man band is that I had to start learning how to get along with women, and that was difficult. I'd never had any close women friends beside my cousin, who also, like, I was her only woman friend. And when it came to building relationships within the fellowship, I was the most awkward person ever to have coffee with. I had no idea how to make conversation. I had no idea like what to ask a person. I was just really awkward to be around. But, you know, I knew that if it weren't for the women in this fellowship, like, you know, I wouldn't feel a part of. So I stuck through those awkward coffee dates and all of that, and it's benefited me today because I have an amazing group of women friends in this fellowship that, you know, I can always lean on, and they just constantly love me and want to help me and guide me. So I'm really grateful for that. Then, yeah, I guess it was during close to my 18 months, I got into a dishonest relationship yet again, because that's, you know, that's my pattern. And I'm not going to speak a lot about that, but what I can say is that it brought me to my knees again. You know, that was an emotional rock bottom that I had in my recovery, where I was trying to fill that void again and nothing was working. You know, I was doing service for the wrong reasons because that person was there. I was going to meeting for the wrong reason. I was a walking defect in every way. I was arrogant and entitled, and I didn't want to listen to my friends. I didn't want to listen to my sponsor, and I got into a massive mess about it. I got to a place where I wanted to use and drink again. I wanted to cut. I wanted to run away. Yeah, eventually the pain got so much that I remember driving to the Park Rennie meeting, and this drunk driver was kind of swerving in the road, and I played chicken with this drunk driver because I didn't think of any other option to get me out of this mess, and I wanted to die. I ended up being the chicken, and after that I went to the meeting and I went to go share about what was happening with me, and the next day I phoned my sponsor and I got honest. And it was really hard, it was always really hard for me to get honest and vulnerable, even in treatment. I remember how painful it was to get honest. But yeah, a whole new chapter of my recovery then opened up, and I started my steps again, my written steps, and God started working in my life again. And it's amazing how, I was doing my written steps on step 1, 2, and 3 at the time, and all of these God experiences started happening for me, and I won't talk much about it, but it's been an incredible experience for me, and I've never felt so connected, with that. But yeah, I'm now on my step 4, and it's really difficult to look at myself. I'm always fearful of looking at myself and looking at, of the things that haven't changed. But from my experience, I've always survived to step 5, so I know I'll get through this one again. But yeah, I'm so incredibly grateful for my life that I have today. It's really beautiful. I have an incredible fellowship, family fellowship that look after me, and I love, all of the fellowship kids. They're like my little brothers and sisters, and I've made incredible friendships. My life is completely different to what it used to be, and I never thought that I would have a life that I have today. So with that, I'm just going to close. Thanks for letting me share.
That's right.